A witch is believed to be a woman who possesses a certain set of skills or supernatural powers, which are usually malignant and used to harm others. This is, of course, a wildly broad stereotype, but it is true to say that witches can be many different things to different people and cultures. What one culture may consider a malevolent fairy, another might think of as a witch or even a demon. So, as always, when observing other people's personal experiences, let's keep an open mind. G'day, I'm Kitty. Welcome to Fairy Encounters. I'm taking you continent hopping today to look at true encounters with creatures which, depending on the lessons you were taught as a child or your adult life experiences, you might take for fairies or witches or even demons. We'll start in my favourite place, Ireland, before going to Nepal, India, the US, Singapore, and we'll finish up in Mexico. Okay, are you ready? Let's go. There lived a witch in Huntsfield, Kilkelly, named Kitty Kilroy. She used to do magic things and never went to Mass or the sacraments, and the priests were very much against her. One day, it happened that one of the priests was visiting on horseback. As he was going along the Huntfield Road, his horse got paralysed and collapsed to the ground. All the men of the village ran to help the priest, but it was of no avail. One of the men spoke about going for the witch. This, of course, was a great insult to the priest, but anyway, the witch was sent for. She came and said some words to the horse, and in the moment she said them, the horse got the power and jumped up. And from that day until the day she died, the priests said not a word about her works. But Martin Brett, who made her coffin, said this himself: "I many times have made a coffin, but I never went astray in making anyone's coffin, but I went astray 3 times in making hers." And it is said that when she was put into the coffin, she turned thrice. There was a haunting in my old home in Nepal. There was a fierce rivalry between 2 brothers, and we lived in one of the brothers' home as renters. One day, the owner's brother unexpectedly came by our house. We thought he was a nice guy, that he just popped in to say hi, and then he left. A little strange, yes, but still we'd have guests visit us often. Well, a lot of strange things happened in the home after that day. For example, all the food in the home would taste bland, and there was a strange-looking woman in white who would try to choke us when we were falling asleep. There was loud banging and a shattering glass noise, yet nothing was ever broken, and a lot of other stuff like that. Eventually, we decided to take a sample of the soil that the house sat on and show it to the shaman. He said that someone had released an evil entity called Churl in the house, and this person is a witch. We then found out that the brother who had come by our house was a witch and had released the entity that day, exacting revenge on his brother by contaminating his property. We were told that it is incredibly difficult to get rid of this thing, and it was best as renters to just move to another place. and so we left. But we never knew churls or any ghosts were real. We'd only heard it in stories and movies, but we really did experience it. It made my family believe in the paranormal. I guess you can say that I found out that witchcraft and the spirit world is real through a bad incident with a bad witch. So this story is about early 1930s time. My great-grandfather was living in India, which was still under British rule then. As he was from a poor family, having a motor vehicle was not even an option for him. It was just for the rich people back then. So he used to travel to nearby places on horses. One day he went to meet with his friend, and it had gotten a little late by the time he was coming back. It was around evening when, while returning, he decided to take a short route through the jungle instead of going through the road, which takes almost double the time. So on the way, he saw a little goat just abandoned, sitting beside a tree, and thought that it might have lost its way. So he decided to bring it along with him and leave it outside of the jungle. So he got down from his horse and picked up this little goat and put it on the back of his horse. Just when he himself was about to sit up on the horse, he noticed something weird. The horns and the feet of the goat were facing the opposite direction, the wrong direction. So quickly and under fear, he pushed the goat down and climbed up on the horse to make a run for it out of the jungle. He started chanting prayer to his guru. He was Sikh in religion. And just as the horse started moving, he heard a female voice from behind.
"Your prayers saved you today, but I don't know how you'll get away next time."
As he turned back, he saw a woman standing instead of the goat, just staring at him with her eyes wide open. This is a true story, and it creeps me out. Even though jungles like these are rare now, the incident is still really creepy. My best friend Dave was driving down a country road with some of our other friends when something wearing long black rags for clothes and had two glowing red eyes shot straight up from the embankment to their right into the air, did a sharp U-turn mid-air and shot straight back down into the middle of the dirt road, leaving just a puff of dust behind it. It all happened so fast, they only had time to quickly hit the brakes before it had disappeared. Well, then they just slowly continued on. There had been a car coming from the other direction, and Dave saw that they paused too, and as the two cars passed one another, the occupants all stared at one another across the divide, looking completely baffled. I used to live in this weird house in Pittsburgh, and a bunch of weird stuff happened there. A few days before I saw what I saw, my roommate had come home with this strange card. It was rectangular shaped and was on thin, waxy parchment, and it had a golden lettering sort of pressed into it. It was basically an invite and some sort of prayer related to Aleister Crowley. Now, Aleister Crowley doesn't frighten or even bother me, but my roommate said this weird chick calmly walked up to him, barefoot downtown, and said, We've been searching for you and yours. Give this to him at home," and then just kept walking. He said she was immensely out of place and almost looked right through him, but had walked straight to him and no one else. Now, he was not a spiritual or occult person at all, so even this description coming from him was strange to me. Anyway, as soon as he handed me the card, I felt chills in my body and got goosebumps. It felt all kinds of wrong. So I burned it. I burned the card. Well, he thought I was nuts. So a few days later, I get home from work. It's night and I'm exhausted, so I go straight to my room and I lay down for the night. My room seemed darker than normal for what moonlight there was, shining outside, and just darker. It was weird. And as I was laying in my bed, I looked up at my ceiling and saw what looked like a mud and scab covered anorexic person with matted greasy hair draping over my ceiling fan. I froze and just laid still for a few seconds in disbelief and fear until it moved its hand forward. I jumped up then and ran out of my house in my underwear and barefoot to my friend who lived up the road. He said I looked absolutely drained white and I was shaking and frantically trying to make sense to him of what I had seen. Well, he let me crash there that night, but I barely slept, and I didn't even go in my room for days. To this day, I still think about it and I still lose sleep. When I was in 8th grade, I had this witch experience that I just haven't been able to shake. I had other people with me when it happened. My friend's dad was driving me home in his 3-seater truck with my friend sitting between us. We got to a stretch of road where we could see my house across the field. They'd planted soybeans that year, so the corn wasn't blocking our view. And in the ditch, right by the road, was a figure I can only describe as a witch. We all saw her. We drove right past her. The ditch lining that road was about 2 feet deep and somewhat overgrown, and we could only see the upper half of her body. It was as if she was sitting cross-legged in the ditch. She was wearing an off-white shirt that was stained brown, and her hair was black and tangled. She was looking up into the sky with her arms extended towards the sky, and she was rocking in a circular motion. I know it sounds bloody ridiculous, but all 3 of us were totally uncomfortable. My friend's dad was a rough round the edges carpenter, a no bullcrap kind of guy, and I remember really feeling scared when he asked us, "What the hell was that?" She didn't look like a homeless person or a drug addict, and we were so far from any town. We literally never had a single person in the 20 years that I lived there wander into our area who didn't belong there. She legit looked like she'd come from another time period and was sitting in our ditch trying to summon a freaking tornado. When we got to my place, my friend's dad walked us inside, which he didn't normally do because my parents didn't socialise with any of my friend's parents, but he came in almost as if he wanted to kill time to not drive back by her again. He told my parents what we had seen, and we couldn't see her from our house, so we called the police just in case it was someone in need of psychiatric help. My friend and his dad left after a couple of minutes, and the police came about 20 minutes later, and they said they didn't see anyone in the ditch and couldn't find anyone walking in the fields or roads in the surrounding area. My friend's dad called us once they got home and said that by the time they drove by the spot on their way home, she was gone. I truly cannot explain it, but my friend says they still talked about it every now and then in the years following. Also, for those who think I just saw a wandering person, besides it not making geographical sense, I don't think I emphasised enough just how otherworldly she felt, because, frankly, I don't know how to describe it. It was the way she moved, the way she didn't even glance at the car. It was a feeling beyond ominous. She just looked like she came from another plane. I used to be in the military and was in the training camp on the island of Tekong. Now, occasionally our stuff would go missing and then reappear in weird places, like under our bed or inside a bag that we had zipped up, stuff like that. No big deal, right? I mean, human error and all. But then one day there came an instance that freaked everyone out. It was one night after lights were out, and my friend was on his phone texting his girlfriend. Most of us were drifting off to sleep and were lying on our beds when suddenly he heard the shuffling of feet coming from the corridor. So, thinking that it was our sergeant, he quickly hid his phone under his pillow, rolled over on his side and pretended to sleep. Till this day, what happened next chills me to the bone. While he pretended to sleep, he heard someone right behind him at the other side of his bed saying, "Don't worry, you can continue to pretend sleep." I would dismiss this as a figment of his imagination, except about 5 other people around him, including me, heard it as well. Creepier still, there was no one there, and it was the voice of a girl that said it. Well, for reference, our training camp was in the middle of Tekong Island and was set up away from the main admin blocks. The island has been closed by the government for army training purposes for the past 15 years or so, so there were definitely no civilians around, let alone kids. Then, to make matters even freakier, when we came back from our weekend home leave, there was a bunch of female hair on his bed. It was neatly bundled up, long and jet black, and under his pillow was a note that read, "Remember me?" Now, as I said, we were in the middle of a forest, in the middle of an island, and at that point in time there were no female recruits or personnel on the island. Our bunks had been locked up for the weekend, and the duty sergeant had no idea that the incident happened at all. We never spoke about it after that night. It still chills me to the bone thinking about it. My dad's family come from a small ranch in Mexico. This ranch is really small, so small that basically all my family lives there. Usually, if you live in that ranch, you're related. There's probably only 4 or 5 families that are not related to us. So the ranch is small and, well, it's very dry. It has dirt roads and so on. Now, once my uncles were getting ready for a party. They were young at that time, maybe their early 20s, and the party they were going to was on another ranch, so it was a little far away. My uncles, being party people, they would take their horses and they'd go to the party. Sometimes they would come back very late. Actually, that was usually the case. So they got ready and started heading to the party. It happened to be a very dark night, but they didn't care. They got to the party, and one of my uncles, Steve, saw these two girls away in the corner. Well, he saw them and he said that they were very beautiful. They had light-coloured hair and light skin, and being in Mexico, it was really rare to see a girl like that. So Steve then elbowed my other uncle Andrew, and they walked up to the girls and started dancing. After a few dances, they'd had a really good time and decided to head home. They said bye to these girls and took off on their horses. So they were riding their horses for about 30 minutes when they saw the same two blonde girls walking down the dirt road. They stopped and got off their horses and walked towards the girls, thinking that they might have wanted a ride home. My uncle then heard one single laugh, and in front of his eyes, they disappeared into the darkness. So they both got back on their horses and continued on home. They later came across another single laughing sound. My uncle Steve got off his horse and asked who was there. Yeah, I know it seems stupid now, but my uncle really didn't care about getting hurt. Then Steve saw two birds. He said they were really big birds and as dark as the night sky. And the two birds were laughing at him. Andrew then got off his horse and walked towards Steve at this point. Both of them looked at these laughing birds, confused. Then one of the birds speaks and said, "We enjoyed dancing with you boys." My uncle Steve really didn't enjoy the fact that he had danced with a witch, so he took out his gun and started shooting at the birds. He always carried a gun with him, by the way. The birds just flew around and laughed at him some more. So Steve started swearing at them. Well, it seems they didn't appreciate that, and one of them flew down and clawed at his face. It scratched his face right up. The birds then flew off, thanking Steve for the dance and actually saying his name. Neither of my uncles had given the girls their names that night. A few years ago, my parents and I were coming home from a trip to Mexico when they saw a levitating person. We used to drive to and from our trips to Mexico, so we left that morning at around 4:30 a.m. Anyway, there is a lot of desert around the part of Mexico where we go. It's very hilly too, and there are these small towns in between that we have to drive through them to get to the main roads. So we were probably about 20 minutes into our trip when I felt the car was slowing down. I didn't think much of it at first since there are a lot of huge speed bumps around those parts. I was in the back seat of the car playing on a DS when I just looked up to see what was going on, and my parents were both looking really hard down into an alleyway trying to see something. I asked what it was they were looking for. They said that they'd seen this person not walking into the alley but coming down from floating in the air. When she touched the ground, my parents said she shot into this alley that was dimly lit but otherwise in full view from the speed bump where we were at. Well, I looked down into the alley and there was no one there. And let me tell you, there were no doors in this alley. There were no ladders. There was nothing. and there's no way she could have run down the whole alley in a matter of seconds. She just vanished. You know, there is a strong belief in witches down in Mexico, and my parents are both convinced that they saw a witch that morning. They're both Mexican and have experienced paranormal stuff there in the past, including witches. I swear to this day you can still see the awe in their faces whenever they talk about it. In 5th grade, I went down to see my grandparents in southern Mexico. It's a small village, there are no sidewalks, there's minimal running water. You have to flush the stone toilet with a bucket of water. It's really simple living there. Well, everyone, and I mean everyone in this village, went to church, and it was a 4-hour-long church mass every Sunday. They'd have to use a PA system for everyone to hear because the church was massive. People from a few nearby villages would make the trip every Sunday to come to my grandparents' village just to attend that church. They are a very religious people. One day I was kicking a soccer ball around with some other kids when my little cousin showed up, and he had crazy bruises and scratches all over his face. Well, I asked him what happened, and he said, La Bruja, which means the witch. I asked my dad what had happened to him, and he told me the same thing. This cousin lived with his grandma, and I had just seen him the day before, and he was perfectly fine, so I knew that it had just happened. This totally freaked me out. Then, on the actual day that we were leaving, my grandparents' neighbour skipped over from his roof onto our roof where I was hanging out. You got to understand that all of these houses had staircases to the roof, and they were flat, so we could have chairs up there and hang out. But anyways, I was up there, and he hops roof to roof until he gets to me, and he is covered in bruises from his neck down to his legs. Well, I asked him what happened, and he said the witch got him because he skipped church 2 times in a row. Man, I was so freaked out. Anyone I asked about La Bruja would tell me the same thing. She was a witch, but not to talk about her. They were genuinely afraid, and it was like a village secret. I grew up in a small town in Mexico with my aunts and my grandma. My parents were in the US trying to buy a house for me to move into with them. I was about 9 years old when this happened. It was a calm evening, and my aunt and I were going to go down to the town square just to hang out with her friends. She instructed me to go tell my grandma that we were leaving and that I'd find her down in the back of the garden. My grandma's backyard was big, and the garden was at the very, very back of it. But anyhow, I didn't think twice about it. I just went to the back of the house and started to walk down towards the garden. The sun was setting at this time, but it was bright enough to see everything around me clearly. While walking, I just happened to glance to my right at an old shed that we had there. Next to the shed, there was a stack of ceramic roof shingles because the house was going to have the roof refurbished. What I saw next still gives me chills today. As I looked over to the shingles, I saw a woman dressed in all black on top of them. The woman's clothes were the darkest black I had ever seen, and next to the woman was an all-black cat with bright yellow eyes looking right at me. I tried to look for her face, but I couldn't see it clearly as there was a hood partly covering it. The only thing I could make out for certain was that she wasn't actually sitting on the pile of shingles. She was crouching on top of them. The shape of her knees could be seen through the clothing, and her pale, bony hands dangled down by her feet. Oh, I was frozen in place at the sight of her, but for some reason I wasn't afraid. Well, after a few seconds, I think, of looking at her, I remembered that I had to go to tell my grandma, so I continued to walk to the garden while periodically glancing back over my shoulder. I saw my grandma and told her that my aunt and I were going down to the town square. She acknowledged me and I turned and started jogging back up to the house. As I jogged past the shed, I looked at the pile of shingles, thinking that I'd see the strange lady again, but there was nothing. Both the woman and the cat were gone. I'm 25 years old now, and I still can't explain what that thing was that was crouched on the pile of shingles. I told one of my aunts that still lives in that house in Mexico about my experience, and she told me that many people have seen that lady and her cat around the town. Everyone seems to agree that she is some kind of witch. I recently went back to Mexico to visit with my family, and every time I walked past that old shed, I felt like someone was watching me. And now I'm not sure if I ever want to go back there again. So what are we looking at? Witch? Fairy? Or worse, demon? Can we be sure they are all different entities? There are so many similarities, particularly between witches and fairies. The one thing that strikes me is that the abilities or the qualities of those things we call witches and fairies are both rooted in the natural world. Let me know what you think in the comments. I hope you enjoy my videos. This is a good vibes place in a sometimes harsh world, a little oasis of beauty and wonder, place to relax and allow our minds to think outside of ourselves and our own human worries, to remember that we are part of the natural world, not separate from it. Well, I hope you're doing well and being gentle with yourself and others. If you like my channel, please show your support to help me to keep it going. There are several ways you can support. Just check out the notes below. I can't wait to see you next week. Until then, stay curious. Cheerio!